Israeli official talks or other means could help secure the release of hostages. According to an Israeli official who spoke to Reuters on Friday, Israel has the option to use negotiations or other means to ensure that the hostages still held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip are freed. After a week-long temporary truce ended, fighting resumed in Gaza. Oded Joseph, Deputy Director General of the Foreign Ministry, spoke in Dubai after the restart, saying that Israel was determined to free all hostages and destroy Hamas. While hostilities were escalating, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners were freed and humanitarian supplies were delivered to the Gaza Strip. Naturally, we would reach a point where again we would want to find a way to make sure all our kidnapped are released, said Joseph. Part of it might have been out of, sort of, discussions, but part of it could be by other means, he said, without explaining anything further. Israel claimed that Hamas had broken the temporary ceasefire. The Palestinian group Hamas blamed Israel for breaking the truce. The mediator's goal was to keep the truce going by figuring out how to keep releasing hostages, maybe even Israeli men, now that there are fewer women and children in captivity. If the Palestinian militant group Hamas were to be destroyed, according to Joseph, it would no longer be a military threat to Israel or the region and would also lose any political clout it had in Gaza. Officials in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza claim that over 15,000 people have been killed in the bombardment that Israel launched in response to Hamas' murderous rampage in Israel on October 7. In order to prevent a recurrence of the massive civilian casualties and displacement of Palestinians witnessed during its offensive, Washington has pleaded with Israel to reduce the size of its combat zone. While calling the conflict a complicated mission, Joseph assured the world that Israel was following all applicable laws and regulations while doing its best to limit civilian casualties. We are fighting Hamas. We're not fighting the Palestinian people. It's also our objective to see minimum loss of life of civilians, either Israelis or Palestinians, according to him. Currently, Joseph is attending the COP28 UN conference in the UAE. Meeting on climate change. In a meeting with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Israeli President Isaac Herzog requested assistance in rescuing the hostages on Thursday. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, has denounced Hamas for the attack on October 7 that killed approximately 1,200 people and took hostage around 240 more, according to Israel. The UAE is one of the few Arab states with official diplomatic relations with Israel. The leader of the Gulf state has demanded the freedom of the hostages. It has also spoken out against Israel's invasion and bombing of Gaza. Joseph stated, "There is no daylight between the way we see extreme organizations in the region." A senior State Department official said that the Biden administration has informed Israel that there will be visa bans on Israeli extremist settlers involved in violence against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank, effective in the next few weeks. U.S. While meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet, Secretary of State Antony Blinken informed them that the U.S. will also be taking action against an unspecified number of individuals. Tensions have been rising in the West Bank, one of the areas where Palestinians are vying for statehood, due to growing Jewish settlements and the breakdown of U.S.-sponsored peace talks that has persisted for almost a decade. Violence reached a more than 15-year high this year as a result of Israel's sudden entry into a new war in the separate enclave of Gaza in reaction to the deadliest day in Israel's history on October 7 by the Palestinian militant group Hamas. When pressed for comment, Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy stated that Israel strongly denounces any form of hooliganism, vigilantism, or attempts by individuals to seize control of the situation. The U.S. has been vocal about its disapproval of the increasing violence in the West Bank, stating time and time again that it must end. U.S. In an opinion piece published in the Washington Post on November 18, Joe Biden, the president, threatened to punish those responsible. "I have been emphatic with Israel's leaders that extremist violence against Palestinians in the West Bank must stop and that those committing the violence must be held accountable. The United States is prepared to take our own steps, including issuing visa bans against extremists attacking civilians in the West Bank," wrote Biden. An anonymous State Department official stated that the U.S. wanted Israel to bring criminal charges against those responsible, but that the U.S. had not seen any progress in this regard. The top official hinted that the bans might be implemented within the coming weeks. United Nations reports that the number of settler attacks per day has increased by more than 100%. According to the data, 1,200 Israelis were killed and approximately 240 were taken hostage by Hamas, the terrorist group that controls the coastal enclave of Gaza to the southwest of Israel. After that, Israel invaded and bombed Gaza, resulting in the deaths of over 15,000 people. The Democratic Party is embroiled in a fierce battle, with progressives and minority voters enraged by Israel's war in Gaza. This internal conflict has echoes of the GOP's schism over Ukraine, according to reporting by Humaira Pamuk and editing by Howard Galler. Both wars have made 2024 candidates publicly face difficult questions regarding U.S. foreign policy and military posture, which could affect their support, even though voters are mostly concerned with economic and domestic issues. These international crises have put President Biden and former President Trump, the likely party nominees for 2024, in the position of having to defend their respective visions of America's place in the world. Michael Genovese, director of Loyola Marymount University's Global Policy Institute, stated, "Trump and Biden are trying to replace the old Cold War mentality with a new one. Trump's America First was like a protective glove. Biden's democracy hasn't caught on with the public." The two heads of state are strongly in agreement that Israel should launch a retaliatory war against Hamas in response to the terrorist attacks on October 7, but they disagree on how to handle the situation in Ukraine, where Russia has invaded. According to Genovese, the United States has not yet resolved its foreign policy quandary following the Cold War. Furthermore, he stated that the current discussion surrounding Gaza and Ukraine could significantly affect the long-term national security of the United States, particularly considering that China has been identified as the country's greatest threat. He lamented that the country's foreign policy was disjointed and lacking cohesion. That can pave the way for others, insert China here, to take advantage of that. Republicans' opposition to Ukraine has been growing gradually, but Democrats' stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict is swiftly becoming more divisive. Supporting Ukraine's fight against Russia while simultaneously siding with Israel's disastrous campaign to demolish Hamas is, according to many younger Democrats, progressives, Arab Americans, and other minority groups, a double standard. Americans have become highly polarized on Israel, remarked Shibli Telhami, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. In the past, Palestine was able to remain relatively unpolarized in the United States. Still, that was then and this is now different. According to Telhami, the schisms are becoming so wide that they threaten Biden's support within his own party, even among voters who are united against Trump, the Republican candidate he is likely to face in 2024. In my opinion, this is an issue with image shaping. People are evaluating the situation. Can we trust Joe Biden, and who is he anyway? Should we elect Joe Biden as our leader? I told you so, he declared. That's an important question. Furthermore, I believe that the war has altered public perceptions of Biden. A revolt broke out within Biden's administration, with over 500 workers signing a letter denouncing the president's war policies. Additionally, a November Marist poll found that over half of all Americans are unhappy with Biden's approach to the Middle East during the Israel-Hamas conflict. Similar disapproval of the president's war handling was recorded in an NBC poll, while Biden's approval ratings plummeted to 40%, his lowest point as president. Predictions about the issue's potential impact on the 2024 elections are further complicated by the fact that leading GOP candidates, including Trump, are very pro-Israel. On the other hand, Biden has already heard the alarm. Early polling in Michigan, a swing state with a sizable Arab American voting population, put Trump ahead of Biden, a crucial state that the Democrat captured in 2020. Hanania Hanna, who served on the board of the U.S. The Palestinian Council warned Democrats that Arab Americans might choose candidates other than Trump and Biden in the upcoming elections. The Democratic establishment is the target of their anger, according to Hanania. The voting behavior here will be more indicative of dissent. In spite of mounting criticism, Biden has maintained unwavering support for both Israel and Ukraine. Meanwhile, more Republicans are reaching out to voters on the issue of Ukraine. The percentage of Americans in favor of arming Ukraine has dropped from 65% in a June survey to 41% in an October Reuters Ipsos poll. Support among Republicans fell from 56% to 35% during that time. Although the majority of Republicans remain in favor of providing aid to Ukraine, the number of votes cast in opposition has grown over the last year, and there is substantial GOP opposition to Biden's request for an additional $60 billion to be sent to Kyiv. Only two prominent Republican presidential candidates, Chris Christie of New Jersey and Nikki Haley of the United Nations, have shown strong support for Ukraine. The leading skeptic of Ukraine in the race is entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, in contrast to Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who have mainly concentrated on wanting to end the war without going into specifics of a peace agreement. U.S. foreign interests and standing with allies are critically dependent on American actions toward Israel and Ukraine, according to Alp Sevim Lysoy, a Western security expert and Millennium Fellow at the Atlantic Council. The Democratic struggle over Israel, he said, is a battle between moderates and progressives over social policies that have been extrapolated onto foreign policy, while Republicans' isolationist distrust of American interests abroad is a countervailing factor. The common thread here is that neither of these stances contribute to the strength of the United States, NATO, or our friends overseas, Sevim Lysoy stated. Polls taken this month revealed not only how deeply divided the Democratic Party is, but also how American support for Israel and Biden has been dwindling since the war broke out in October. The American people rallied behind the Palestinian militant group Hamas after its shocking attack killed 1,200 Israelis. Roughly 10 Americans were among the 240 people abducted by Hamas. Nearly half of Americans, 41%, think the United States should back Israel, according to an October Ipsos poll. However, support has dropped sharply following Israel's historic bombing campaign on Gaza, the ground invasion that killed over 13,000 Palestinians, and the blockade of humanitarian supplies to the Strip.